John Tucker. So I was away last week, and one thing that didn't change is that former President Donald Trump still grinds his way towards the GOP nomination, and there's continuous dysfunction in Washington and a potential shutdown this week and another shutdown next week. So shocker. I mean, I really wasn't surprised. Let's go to Nathan Dean. Let's see if he was surprised. Nathan Dean is Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst. Nathan, I know it's lame, but I want to start on the shutdown risk. So partial shutdown risk for Friday, and March 8th would be a full shutdown. How worried do I need to be? I feel like I have shutdown fatigue.
So if you're sitting in New York and you're trading in the markets, you don't need to be worried all that much because scary headlines associated with market or shutdowns doesn't equate to scared markets. And we have not seen much of an impact even for the 35-day shutdown that we had under President Trump. You know, the S&P 500 had actually regained and was up prior to when the shutdown had started. Even if you're looking at defense contractors, if you're in that space, most of these defense contractors have their projects 18 months, 2 years down the line. So there's really not much of an impact per se for this shutdown. You know, if you're on the commodity space, you know, on March 1st, the Department of Agriculture is one of these agencies that will shut down. Some of those reports won't come out. The BLS reports are actually part of the second shutdown on March 8th. So a lot of the data that traders use could be delayed, but ultimately shutdowns really aren't a thing for New York and traders. It's mostly, you know, a lot of headline risk and questions about uncertainty.
All right, so let's assume something happens with the shutdown story, that they figure out some way to keep things going here. How about the big piece of legislation, which is kind of this aid to Ukraine and to others tied to immigration? Where are we on just kind of getting some legislation done?
Yeah, so I don't think that's going to come up in the shutdown debate this week. Look, the House doesn't come back until Wednesday, and they have till Friday night to figure out a solution. Even if they don't, let's just say that there is a partial shutdown going into next week, there's not enough time for the Ukraine aid to be a part of that. So I think what will happen is that sometime next week or either this week, they'll kick the can down the road and they'll kick it to April. And then we have a deadline of April 30th. That is a 1% sequester if we are operating under a continuing resolution. I would anticipate the Ukraine discussions to come in at that point because nobody in Washington wants a sequester, especially one that impacts the Department of Defense. There has been talk about a discharge petition. This is a little wonky way for Democrats to try and force a vote in the House going over Speaker Johnson. I'm not putting much credence into that just because it takes a lot of time. The easier way for the Ukraine to go forward, and we are cautiously optimistic that it can get there, is that Senator Schumer includes it as part of a funding deal in April to avoid the sequester. We'll go through the same headline risk and the same, concerns over is the government going to actually do this or not. But ultimately, I think some form of funding can be found.
It's just amazing. It's just amazing to me. I know we all say this, but like if anyone ran their own budget like this, it would be a disaster. So this is what leads me then to former President Trump and his victory in South Carolina, and then the news that the Koch brothers super PAC will be no longer funding Nikki Haley, not because they hate her, but because they actually want to go fund people in Congress or in the Senate and the House of Representatives, because that's where they think they can make the most difference. How will this story play out?
So, obviously, I think the results from South Carolina prove that it is President Trump's nomination. This election, we like to joke, is between President Biden, President Trump, and people not voting. And ultimately, I think what we're telling our clients, and we're working with our clients, especially with non-U.S. investors on this, is, okay, at this point, we have many months until the election. Let's talk about the potential policies that could come out. Let's think about what President Trump would want to do if he becomes president, because on day one, he's going to implement a lot of executive orders. One of those could be the Inflation Reduction Act. There are a lot of tax incentives geared towards clean energy and toward the solar industry in there that could be delayed, discarded, and done away with that ultimately could impact that sector quite a bit. So in terms of where we are and trying to think of what's going to happen with the election, once I think we get through Super Tuesday, I think markets and the general United States will just agree this is a race between President Biden and President Trump. We need to start thinking about, okay, what's going to happen if they become president and the likelihood and the what if scenarios of how does it impact your sector?
Yeah, that's interesting, Nathan. I mean, I can't imagine being a non-U.S. investor and trying to handicap just the political risk in the U.S. market. I mean, is there a way that people are kind of hedging here their positions, or do you just kind of wait and see how this thing plays out?
Well, I think a lot of it is also just trying to wait and see what play out, but a lot of it is what-if scenarios. So, generally presidents in the second term of their administration, and I'm just going to presume here that President Trump, this would be like a normal second term, is that presidents usually tend to lose their political capital after about 1 year to 18 months. Why would Congress want to stick their necks out for somebody in year 3 or year 4 when they're not going to be here? So presidents tend to move internationally and stay away from Congress and look across the ocean per se, because the power of the presidency is a lot more powerful there when it comes to foreign policy, trade, and tariffs. So I think as traders, as you look through this, you're probably going to have about 1 year of domestic policy front where they're going to try and work with Congress to get things done. The second year is probably going to be a regulatory year. So if you're in the financial space, you'll have new leadership at the Fed and the OCC and the SEC and so forth. And then year 3 and year 4 is going to be more of a geopolitical macro year, because that's when the president sees, and we saw this under President Obama, we saw this President George W. Bush, they look outwards, and you're going to see a lot more negotiations, trade deals, and so forth like that.
Is there a realistic scenario where we go to the Republican convention and delegates just throw their votes to Nikki Haley?
Look, there's always a chance that there could be a no labels candidate, a third-party candidate, that Nikki Haley decides that she's going to run as an independent. There's always going to be a chance of that. But the general consensus, at least from the Washington folks that I work with and speak to, is that this is just going to be, once they go to the conventions, that they're going to give the votes to President Trump, and he's going to be the nominee. Because ultimately, I think a lot of the Republicans out there, and we're starting to see this in the Senate with their endorsement of President Trump, is, look, the idea here is that if he wins, we have 4 years, and then he's gone. If he loses, he's gone. So a lot of the Republicans out there say, look, we'll just throw our support to President Trump, and then we'll live the fight 4 years from now or, later next year.